I imagine what it's going to look like. I get a picture of what I want in my mind. And then I use the color tools that I have to get there. And when I find it, it's done.
On this episode of the Colorist Podcast, I talked with veteran film color timer Dale Grahn. Long before films were colored using computers, Dale color timed movies using only the technology available at the time, printer points and printer lights. He is best known for pioneering the bleach bypass look of Saving Private Ryan, and he's also worked on other huge films like Gladiator, Minority Report, The Ring, Die Hard, and Bram Stoker's Dracula. His work included animated films like The Lion King, Aladdin, Toy Story, and Beauty and the Beast, which required a different workflow that many timers avoided altogether. He's collaborated with some of the biggest names in the industry, like Steven Spielberg and Joel Silver. Currently, he is a fellow of the Colorist Society International and has directed his energy towards recognition of colorists worldwide. On this podcast, we talk about gaining the opportunity to time his first major film, Predator, the bleach bypass look, and how it happened almost by mistake, creating looks with the limited tools available in color timing, and why printer points are still used today. And now, here's Dale Grahn. Hey Dale, thanks so much for making the time to come onto the podcast.
Oh, you're welcome, Josh.
So give us some background. How did you get started as a color timer?
Well, actually, I started hauling around or pushing around raw stock. It was basically a human forklift or hand truck. But yeah, we pushed everything around. We carried all the film, like stacks of film, hundreds of pounds on these hand trucks that you had to push into the elevator, and then you had to take it up and put it on the printing machine and stuff. And basically, that's how I started, was, right at the bottom of the film laboratory system, and then just kind of worked my way up through positive developing. And then within 2 years, I was chosen to go into the timing department as a timing assistant. They had an assistant program at MGM. It was really hard to get into because most people that had been there for more than 10 years were applying for it and didn't get it. I was lucky, I guess, because people saw me. I was kind of a small guy, so people saw me carrying these big stacks of film. They thought, oh, boy, that guy's got spunk or something. Or he's going to die. Literally, the stacks were taller than me of the film, and they must have weighed. And each can, there's probably 60 cans. Each can's like 50 pounds. They were massive stacks, so... But anyway, that's how I got started, and then I learned how to do the assistant. Now, they were doing screen timing at the time, and so that was the reason for the assistant. The assistant had to take down the color corrections while the film was running that the timer was calling out, and then make those corrections into the printing file, and get the new print, view the print, make sure there's nothing wrong with it, then bring it back to the theater to run for the timer again so you can make print changes again.
And at this time, this was still all black and white, or was this color?
No, this is color. In fact, this was past. This was when I started. We were just finishing the matte system where they would use color mattes to do the actual timing. It was used as like an overlay on the negative. So they would use a color filter for each scene. They would put several color filters in to change the color of the light passing through the negative. That changed. But that was an ineffective system because the filters that are long. They're maybe sometimes 20 feet or more, depending upon the scene length. They can vary from beginning to end. In color, they can breathe, so to speak, in color. So that was not a very good system, but that was the system that we had. Now, that ended just as I started. I did some of that, but very little. And we had moved into the additive system. That was a subtractive system. We moved into the additive system. And now we were using printer points and printer lights from a printing machine that would use a prism to divide light.
Most of the people that listen to the podcast, they're very familiar with telecine and color grading, but how is that different from color timing?
Well, I know that I looked it up on Wiki, but because I wasn't sure, because we never had the two terms. In my world, color grading was done in England, and timing was done in America. So they were just the same job, but one was called grading, one was called timing.
And color with a U.
Yeah, and color with a U. So that was the difference between grading and timing. That meant you either lived in Europe or you lived in America. But now today they're trying to say that one is the preparation of the work and the other is the artistic part of the work. But that's never been true. We never had the luxury of doing one thing at a time. And in fact, it just wouldn't work. You had to be able to understand where to take the image immediately. You could not guess. You had to know. It was a totally different approach to color timing than today, where you could literally not know anything about color, sit down with a wheel and find something that looked decent. But that was never possible before, unless you understood timing and lights and things of that nature, and how fast they moved and what would happen to an image. You had no way of knowing what to do. So it was a very isolated job for a long, long time. Now with the advent of digital, it's available to everybody, which is a great thing, actually. It was so isolated before that so few people were capable of doing it. And so few people did actually do it. Like when I was working in my height, I was doing over 20 films a year. That's a lot of films. And those were major features. That's a lot of movies.
And how long would it generally take you to time a film?
Well, it depends, because you almost always got the film in parts. You didn't get it completely cut. There would be editorial recuts and things of that nature. There would be sound changes. There would be whole reels removed and things of that nature. And of course, optical effects always took longer to get in there, and then you had to do those. But the average film, if you had everything there, the average film would take about 3 color timing corrections before you were pretty much had a good image overall. Something that you could present to the client as a final product. Then you go from there. They say, well, I don't like this, right? Do like that, or whatever. But normally you would have maybe with an original negative on a major motion picture, you'd probably run with the cameraman and the director at best, unless there were a lot of recuts, at best 3 times before you're approved. If you can't get through it that fast, then you're probably not going to be a timer long. So, they expected immediate results. And the funny thing is that everything was a guess. It looks like maybe 3 points. It could be 4. Who knows? So you don't know until you get the print back. That's another advantage to digital, is now you can tell whether you made a mistake immediately. I've done digital before. It didn't take, probably take 2 hours to do a movie in digital because it's right there. So you make your changes, move on, and it wouldn't take very long at all.
So with the modern digital systems today, we have a lot of options to change things locally, like, change just one portion of a shot or window something. But when you were working as a timer, you had to globally change everything. That's correct. We did have the ability at one time. I did it on a couple of movies, but it was a very expensive process. We could change contrast shot to shot, scene to scene. And we could even change the color of highlights and midtones and blacks if we wanted to, shot to shot. But it was a very involved process, and I'm the only one that I know of that ever did that. I learned how to do that from Vittorio Storaro. We did it on Bulworth, was one of the films that we did it on. We also did a little bit, I think, on Dick Tracy. But it involves creating a whole new printing file and being able to adjust all of those and get perfect incremented flashes. So you have to have a very good control department in order to do that. And you have to run the actual print through a couple of times in order to do it. So it's a very difficult process, very time-consuming, very expensive. And very few people knew about it or ever used it. Now today, you have all of those tools, and they're really kind of great if you have problems. But I only see those tools, I don't see them necessarily as creative tools or beauty tools. I see them as corrective tools. You're going in there to correct a mistake. Basically, that's what your LGG is for, is to correct contrast and other issues. Like if you haven't color in your highlight or something like that, you want to go in your gain and take it out, But other than that, I think the lift gamma gain, I see it used a lot today with diffusing colors and desaturating and re-adding it back into the gain or the gamma. And I don't see that as actually being very effective, because you're distorting the image. You're breaking it up. For me, when you photograph an image, you want your LGG clean. You want it white and black. That's basically what it's supposed to be. And when it's not, it distorts color. And you would say the more that you push that image around, the more problems that you can have. Well, you start to break up the image when you start to go past global RGB. You're infiltrating the image. Every image is based on RGB and LGG. That's all the information. It's all in pixels in those 6 areas. That's your entire image. So when it's photographed originally,
hopefully the LGG is all black and white. It's clean, no color in it. But sometimes cameras have biases, and they'll add something in there. We used to have biases in stocks where the blacks would be a particular color or the highlights would be a particular color. So we had to go in between there. We had to adjust each stock to our system to remove those biases. So basically that's what we were doing with stocks in the control department at film laboratories, is trying to get the LGG to be white based on the stock that and every stock would change. If we didn't have them, then all of our corrections wouldn't work right. Like if you have, say, a bias in your yellow, say a yellow bias in your highlight, right? You start taking out blue to remove it, or taking out yellow to remove that to get it back to white again, and you're distorting everything else in the image.
Effectively, that's kind of the goal of something like ACES now, is that everything kind of lives in the same space.
It should live in the same color space because you have what I call the color board. You have 50 colors in every direction, 50 points in every direction when it's broken down into points. So you have red going 50 points to the red and going 50 points to the cyan because they're opposite colors. Go down and you get cyan, go up, you get red. So it's the same thing in the color wheel. The color wheel is based on 50 points in each direction. That's how it's incremented out. You can make it more than that. You can make it, 100 or 1,000 points if you wanted to, but it would be so small, your corrections would be so small, you wouldn't be able to see them.
Oh, I see. Is there a certain limitation to what can be printed on film?
No, actually, film would have almost no limit. It has more colors than digital. It also has the ability to do a halftone, which digital does not. Digital rounds off. That's why you don't get true film color in digital. 1 point, when I say 50 points, what I'm talking about is an 0.025 color filter. It's a standard 1 point increment for film. That's how the color board is divided, by 0.025 filters. So if you go down to 0.025, you multiply it by 10, which we did actually, then you end up with your control readings. Those are 10 times greater than a point of color.
And did you just do these kind of by feel or intuition?
You look at the image and you say, well, it's this red, so it needs this much cyan, or it needs this much yellow. It's just a question of experience. It's a question of being able to look at an image and say, okay, that's too red, that's too this, that's that. I see something in the mid-tone that I don't like. I see something. You have to be able to look at an image and tell where the color is. Otherwise, it's going to take you forever to find out what the problem is. If you have to go through and look through everything to see what's happening. I watch people, and I don't know how I would do it digitally because it seems to me like it takes so long to set up to do anything. You have all your graphs and your charts and everything else, and you go through this process of, I guess people go through and they try to, adjust the contrast or whatever first and then go through and do the beauty or whatever. But to be honest, you wouldn't want to adjust contrast until you got your color right because color affects contrast. So you're kind of double stepping yourself there. But again, everybody has their own workflow, what they call a workflow system. And, I don't know what mine would be. I'm sure I would just do my color first, and then color and density first. And if I had any anomalies with contrast, I'd go into the LGG and fix that, and I'd be done.
I mean, many high-profile digital colorists still use tools like printer points in their grading systems, and they have a ton of other tools. So why do you think that this tool is so well regarded?
The points are important. I think they're absolutely essential because they are exact increments of color. When you're using a wheel, you're moving a point to another point, and you may not be able to move that exactly the same way each time. In fact, you probably can't hit that exact same point because they're so small on that color wheel. When you're adding color, you want to be able to add an exact increment. If you have two scenes that look exactly the same, they have exactly the same exposure, you want to put exactly the same correction on them. You don't want to just get close. That's just a professional goal. Professionals want to have it technically correct as well as aesthetically correct. They don't want somebody to go in and say, well, your cutbacks don't match. They're uneven, because that makes you look like you don't know what you're doing. So that's why I would never use a color wheel. I'd always use points, increments, because I know exactly where I am. And I also think in color points.
So even when you were timing, you were asked to do something completely different than what was shot. I saw an interview where you were talking about The Ring, and you were talking about how you had to do something vastly different than what was shot. How are you able to do that with the limited tools you had as a color timer?
Well, that's where the skill comes in.
Yeah.
So what we do, or what I do, is I imagine what it's going to look like. I get a picture of what I want in my mind. And then I use the color tools that I have to get there. And when I find it, it's done. So I know where I'm going. And I know, like, well, I want this color blue, so this is too red. So I'm going to take red out of this in order to get that blue. So you have to imagine the color, and the color space and what you're going to create first. Then you move towards it to see whether it's going to work or not. And when you get there, if it works, everything looks right, then you made the right decision, you had the right vision. If not, then you're going to start over again. But most of the time, you're going to go the right direction. With the ring, they wanted something. They actually asked me, they said, we want a look, but we don't want it to look like you made a look. So we don't want you to make it look like you tried to make a look. We just want you to make a look and just have it be a look. And so I said, well, all right, let's see. You got a scary, scary story. The girl's in a well. So a traditional would be a cool blue. So that would be not so good. So I went from a cool blue to a greenish blue to try and bring, green has a little bit of evil sense to it. So I brought a little bit of green into the blue, made it kind of a teal color, and that worked. And I kept that color in those areas and then removed it when I wasn't in those areas. But I would also lead up to it. So in other words, if you're getting close to one of those areas, then it would start turning into that color before you got there. So it wouldn't be a big shock when you did get there.
And all of this you were able to envision in your mind. I think that for people who do color today, they don't realize is they can just push something around and immediately see the result. You had to actually think about what that was going to be and then wait and then have it printed and then it comes back.
Right. And you can't do that with people's negatives, because you run the risk every time you print it to breaking and scratching the negative. Plus it costs money to have a person do that. It's very expensive. So you couldn't guess incorrectly, is what I would have to tell you. But it all was guessing. You just had to be really good at guessing.
This is a perfect segue into the question I'm sure you're asked about all the time is Saving Private Ryan.
Never heard of it.
Yeah, it was.
That was another guy in England.
A different Dale Grahn.
Yeah, it was a different guy.
It's a huge milestone in color, and it really is the beginning of bleach bypass or silver retention or whatever you want to call it. And it was used in many films after that. But what I don't know if many people realize is that it started as a mistake.
Yeah, well, it was kind of a mistake. I'm assuming it was a mistake because we were processing all the film. We had a process called E&R. If you look it up, actually Vittorio Storaro was one who invented it with another guy, Ernesto. It's a contrast enhancement process. It goes through a developer and adds the contrast by retaining more silver, right? So what we had to do with that, we had a 50 level, that's standard. When they were in England, they accidentally got the IR rating up to 100 one day, and it only affected a couple of shots. But when it did go to 100, it gave that bleach bypass look to it, right? And Steven saw those shots and said, wow, that looks great. Can we do that? I'm working over here in America thinking that we're at 50, right? IR. And I'm putting everything at 50, and I can't match that color. I can't match that look. I've got too much saturation. My color is just too saturated, and I don't have a button for saturation, okay? So I went to my control guy and said, I can't get this. I got too much saturation. I can't get it to work. Why is it not working? We're running the same as them. We're running 50 IR. I said, but it looks like I need to go higher. And he goes, well, I can get you to 100 if you want. I said, what? I was under the impression 50 was the highest. 50 or 60 was the highest. I said, give me 100. And so we did it. We made a test that day at 100, and it matched exactly. So I matched the color correctly. I timed it as close as possible, but I just didn't have the 100 IR. So once I got the 100 IR, it matched identically. And then from that point on, I had to work with that 100 IR, which was very hard to work with. It doesn't move the same way that other film moves. It totally moves slower and doesn't react the same way to color. That's the same thing that happens when you desaturate an image today in digital and then you try to add color back to it. It doesn't work right.
You've had the opportunity to work with some amazing cinematographers like Janusz Kaminski, Mauro Fiore, John Seal. When you work with these guys, did they shape the way that you timed your films?
No. No, Yanis always had a lot of ideas, but we always had to bring them back a little bit.
It was mostly the directors that you worked with.
And actually, mostly me.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I had a different approach than a lot of people did. In my opinion, if you didn't let me ask you, like, run your work print with you, that's something that you've been doing your dailies on, you've been looking at, you so you know what it looks like, right? I would sit down with them on work print, and I would always ask for sound because I want to hear the story. I want to know what's going on because I'm going to be thinking about timing a story. I would sit down, I would ask them questions about it. Do you like this? Do you like that? What do you like about this? What don't you like about that? And then I would go away and I would give them my version, my interpretation of it. And more often than not, they would go with my interpretation. And the reason that I did that is because if you're going to use me as a timer and if I have skill, and you come in and you tell me what to do, everything to do, then you're not using any of my skill at all. You're just using your skill. And you might as well have a monkey back there. So, for me, to have the client drive the boat is the wrong idea. Because then the client's not getting any of your skill, not getting any of your ideas, not getting any of your input. And to me, that's considering that the timer has no skill, no ability, no input. And that, to me, is the wrong approach for... Now you're limited to the director's skills in color timing and maybe the editor and maybe the cinematographer, but they're not capable of color timing. So, I know a lot of people that think they are. Like Michael Bay is very, very aggressive in color timing sessions. So he drives that boat, but that's okay because that boat holds a lot of money.
Yeah.
You're going to somebody to pay that much to do anything they want.
Exactly. Yeah. Aside from these other films, when I look at your IMDb, you've also done the color for animated films like Toy Story, Aladdin, Beauty and the Beast.
Yeah, one time that's all I did do was animation. I started off at Technicolor with Beauty and the Beast. I had left Deluxe just recently, and I had done Oliver and Company there. Now, that was a successive exposure negative, which most timers didn't know how to do. They didn't know how to time it because it's black and white negative and turns into color. It's like doing YCMs. Basically that's what it is. You have 3 frames for each frame. You have a YC and an M frame, and then you have to combine them, and then make your changes that way. It's exaggerated and higher contrast color, so it's more saturated, and so it's harder to work with. And that's why. And then plus animation. Most color timers, they were looking for blacks and whites and flesh tones. They looked at the animation and said, there's no blacks, there's no whites, there's no flesh tones, how do you time it? And they just gave up. Now, most timers would not time animation. So I took it because nobody else wanted it. And I was hungry. We started, actually, after Beauty and the Beast on Aladdin, we worked directly with Disney animators in choosing the colors for each film from that point forward. We did testing on every single color that they were going to use to show them where it was going to be in the final product. Because you have to go through, you're going through high contrast negative, first of all, with successive exposure. Then you're going to an IP, and then you're going to an inner negative, and then you're going to a print after that. And colors are going to shift. So we had to make sure that we could track those colors all the way through. And we had to do a lot of things to do that. Animation was massive amounts of work and research before we could actually time the movie. But by the time the movie was finished, the animators were finished with it. It was pretty much already timed.
Yeah, you think it's something even like Toy Story that's done digitally, that it should at least be close, but I'm assuming that there was a lot of work to be done.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, Toy Story, right. Toy Story was different because it wasn't the successive exposure. It was, computer generated. And the negative seemed to be actually pretty standard. It took the colors pretty well. It wasn't like crazy like other animation. So it was fairly easy to time. Toy Story had a lot of story to it. So there were a lot of things to do with that. Basically in certain areas, you want to have the bedroom a certain area. You want to make sure that Buzz Lightyear is always the same color. So you do have flesh tones or tones. Colors that you have to reproduce. So that was actually pretty easy to do. As far as it was much easier to do than successive exposure.
So let me take you back to the beginning when you did your first feature film, which I believe was Predator, right?
Well, yeah, the first big one, yeah.
So how did you get the opportunity to first work on that? Because there wasn't very many timers doing this stuff. How did you get the opportunity to do that?
Well, actually, I was at Deluxe, and I'd just gotten there from MGM. I just left about a year. And I was working nights, so I was the janitorial timer at night. You know, anything that went wrong, you got to fix it. Like if a negative goes offline or out of production, you have to time a new section back or something like that. You would do dailies, or if a trailer came in at night, you would time a trailer, put a light on it for the timer in the morning. Well, the trailer on Predator came in, and the client wanted to see it at midnight. And so I got it. When I first got in, I put a couple of corrections into it, and I went and showed it to the client. Normally, they'd wait for the timer was going to time the movie, who had already been assigned. Bob Hagens had already been assigned to Predator. And so I ran with Joel Silver, it turns out, showed up. And we ran the trailer, and he stood up and said, "This is the best blank trailer I've ever seen in my life. You're timing my movie." And I said, "Sir, I can't time your movie. I'm just a trailer timer. I'm here at night. You've already been assigned a timer." He says, "I'm Joel Silver, and you're timing my movie," and he walked out. And next night, I got a phone call from the president of the company. And the first thing he says is, "Dale, what the hell did you say to that client last night?" And I go, "Oh, great. I'm going to get fired." That guy got me fired, you know. And I don't know, sir. He was crazy. He just yelling and screaming, wanted me to time his movie. He says, "Oh, I don't know what you said, kid, but he likes you and you're timing his movie." So I moved from trailers at night to the day shift and did Predator. And then right after Predator, I did Die Hard, and I became Silver's timer there for a while. I also did Roadhouse as well, yeah. Yeah, and then the rest is, I also did other films like, Earth Girls Are Easy and Cannibal Women in the Avocado Jungle of Death. So, I wasn't that famous yet. I had my low-budget films, too.
What I think a lot of people probably, they first got exposure to who you are and what you do is through the Koji Color LUTs and the plugins. And I mean, for many years, we had heard about companies like Film Look, and people were really chasing the idea of making digital look like film. What really set this one apart from the others?
Well, what we did is we took the remaining stocks, and we found what was left. There was almost nothing left. And we shot a test negative, and then we had those printed with the different stocks. And I made certain that all of the controls were exactly perfect within 1/100th of a point. And making sure that there were no anomalies in the print. There was no printer streaks or anything like that could distort the recordings. And we recorded all the information off of the film. And that's why we have really, really accurate LUTs. If you go to, there's a video that Mixing Light did about Koji Color, and shows on the graphs how clean the colors are. You should probably take a look at that. It's pretty interesting because he shows all the different stocks, or most of the different stocks, through the different graphs and the charts and things, and he uses the grayscale to show how the colors are very clean and they're not clipping very much. And so they really like it. Mixing Light. And I'm very proud of what we accomplished there, because I think that it's one of probably the best out there, and I'm hoping that it's going to remain, because that's it. There's no more film unless they start reproducing it, or unless you want to take it off of just 70 millimeter, which I think they're still doing that now. But other than that, I don't know how you're going to get those old stocks. They just don't exist. So, and then you'd have to know how to do it. So,
which they would need somebody like you, which there aren't very many people like you anymore.
Not too many. There's still some. They're darn near dead, though. Yeah, it's an old craft. It's really old.
Have you had the opportunity to watch anything with the new technologies in the theater? Have you seen anything in HDR, or are you up with a lot of the new technologies still?
Well, I've seen some 3D, and I go out and watch movies, and I'm not very happy with a lot of what I'm seeing, because I see the same thing being repeated everywhere. I see just a lot of desaturation and a lot of flattening out of the images, and people seem to like brown a lot. They also seem to infiltrate. I see colors in the LGG. I see them, and to me, it's like the whole image is like one color. It doesn't make any sense. So you're not getting color separation, so you don't get clean images. I don't know. I see an awful lot of that, more desaturation than anything else, and I think that's a tool that's being overused. I think that really photography is very beautiful, and if you just bring out the beauty of the photography itself, that's really the best you can do, unless you're trying to create a particular feeling, tell a story, where you have to alter something and make it look a particular way to give that feel, You don't feel like it's cold if you're standing in a bright yellow bank of snow. It feels cold if it's dark and blue.
The story should motivate all of the choices that you make doing color.
Right. And the colors shouldn't take away from the story. It should support the story. And that's a problem that I have with a lot of these things that I'm seeing today, is that I'm so busy looking at I'm wondering why the thing looks the way that it does, that I lose the story. But that's just me, because I look at everything in a timing eye. I criticize everything I see. But that's just me, because I just can't seem to turn it off.
So you've also been involved with the Colorist Society International, CSI, and a strong proponent of it since its beginning. Why do you think an organization like this is needed in that community?
Well, I think I made the statement before, unrepresented is unrecognized in our industry. If you're not represented by someone or something, then you're an individual, and individuals can be pushed aside. But if you start an organization like, say, CSI, and you have a bunch of members, and you start seeing these members out of this particular group doing really well, good work, then you're going to want to go to that group. And then what I feel is that now, the work isn't just done on IMDb, because up till the time that the IMDb started, I had no record of the films that I had done. There was no record anywhere. So, unless I remembered what film I did, I didn't know if there was no record of done that, because they disappear. Films disappear, I'm sure you could find them in the credits, but it's really essential that color timing, digital or otherwise, be recognized as an art form, and that it should be a part of the academy. I can't imagine how they can justify giving sound editors who basically do what we were color editors, They give sound editors credit and Academy Awards, but according to the Academy, color doesn't mean anything. It's not important. It's never been recognized. And that's just crazy, because I think I've proven that color can be important. Like with Saving Private Ryan, that movie would not be the same. People would not have reacted to that had it been timed normally. So I think that it's time for the Academy to wake up, and without an organization that can be respected, and people within that organization that can be respected, like, the Cameron's Association, the editors, we're not going to get anything. We're not going to get anywhere. So that was one of the reasons why we decided to create that association. And I hope that it grows, and I hope that a lot of people will join it, and I hope that it will be recognized as a place of excellence where you can go and this person's involved here, they're going to be good. They're involved with this group, they're going to be good.
So if you were starting today as a colorist or a color timer or any of those, what advice would you give yourself?
Well, first of all, I'd want to know what all of the equipment is out there. I would want to be able to handle all the equipment with ease, know exactly where everything is so that I could demonstrate that I have that ability. I'd also want to be able to quickly bring an image to a good place right in front of someone's eyes so that they could see that I have the potential. But I'd also want to learn how all of those tools affect the image, because there are a lot of them that may not be necessary. Again, like I said, I think we use a lot of these windows. I've seen windows way overused to take out this tiny little thing near someone's eye and then track it through a 30-foot shot. It just, really? If people are looking at that in your movie, you've lost them already. So, but people like Michael Bay, they like to do a lot of windows. They like to be in complete control of everything. They like to adjust contrast. They like to try new things. And that's all great, but it's a lot of work. And again, like I say, once you start breaking up the image, start going into it and disassembling it, it becomes kind of a less of an image in my mind. You can make it more of an image by making something out of it, something that looks different, but most of the time, all you're going to do is distort the image. So again, I'd also want to learn how to deal with different cameras and the images that they create on their own terms. How does a red camera black, what's the tendency of a red camera black? How does it react to color? How does it react to density? How does it react to contrast? It's going to take over my whole image. What? Can I subtle it out without graying it out, without making it milky? All these things I'd want to know and I'd want to learn. But that would happen through experience. And again, if I were going to start off, I would have at least a good amount of skills before I even went in to try and ask for a job. I wouldn't go in there just saying, without any experience, or because I'd read a few books or something, or because I played with it at home. But really, the key to everything and to timing in my mind is the image itself. You have to be able to look at the image and divide the image, into its RGB and LGG and see what's there. What can you do with it? How's that going to affect it? How's it going to affect the image, the way that you look at it? How's it going to affect the story? Because sometimes you don't want flesh tones. Like if somebody's out in the dark, in blue, snowy area, their face is not going to be flesh. It's going to have some blue in it. It's relative to the light that you're in. So again, you got to think about all of those things. So you wouldn't make a scene really blue and then throw a window up to a person's face and make that normal flesh tone. That would look ridiculous. Again, things like that. Just use the tools. Most of those tools, I think, are corrective tools, like I said. Your basic beauty tools are RGB, global RGB.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Thank you for doing the podcast. This has really been a really great experience. Thank you so much for doing it.
Oh, you're welcome, Josh.
So would you like to point the listeners anywhere, or?
Well, I have a few products out there, but, I don't, the Koji Advance, Koji Color, if you like the 3D LUTs. There's also Koji Go, which is an iPhone app. It's not as good as it could be, but it does have a few tools. It's kind of fun, but not anything that a timer would want to purchase necessarily, because it's not that kind of a tool. I used to have a Dale Grahn Color iPad app that actually was a color training app. That's currently not on the iTunes market, but it got good reviews when we first came out with it about 4 years ago. And it was a good tool.
I still have mine.
Oh, you have yours? Oh.
I have an iPad 2 that I refuse to update, mainly just so that I can keep that app around.
Yeah, it's. I have to talk to Crumple Pop and get that. They said they were going to put it back out on the iTunes store, but I don't know if they are or not, because I don't think there's that much of a demand for it anymore. But it's a shame, because it was a good tool, and it was good for somebody to practice with, because it helps them to understand images and how to use just RGB if you want to, and global. And then you can go inside and do other things, but I didn't give the ability in that to go into change the color of the LGG, but I did give the ability to adjust it. So, the LGG.
Well, thanks again for doing the podcast.
Oh, yeah. My pleasure. Thanks, Josh, for everything.